One of the most common questions I get from the first time CEOs I work with is what should I actually be doing as CEO? And I completely understand the confusion because whether you built the business or you were promoted into the role, nobody ever sits you down and explains this is where you should be spending your time. That's why so many overwhelmed CEOs spend their days working on whatever feels most urgent, whatever they're good at, or whatever tends to land in front of them. The problem with that is it can keep you busy, but not on the things that truly matter. Because just think, how often do you look back after a 60-plus hour week and despite feeling like you never stopped, you don't actually know what you move forward? If your answer is often, then it's usually not because you aren't working hard enough. And instead, it's because you've never properly defined your role. My name's Byron Morrison. I'm the author of The Effective CEO 2.0, and clearly defining your role is exactly what I'm going to help you do in this video. So, what should a CEO actually be doing? In my experience, the answer is it depends. Yes, you need to set the vision, drive the strategy, bring together the right team, and make sure everything is functioning properly. But beyond that, every CEO is different with varying skills, strengths, and weaknesses. The role also changes as the business grows, which is why the CEO your business needed to reach this stage usually isn't the one it'll need to reach the next one. So, how do you define your role? Well, to do so, there are three questions you need to answer. The first is, what is your zone of genius? If you think about your journey and what got you to where you are today, what has been your unfair advantage or unique set of skills that has massively contributed to your growth? For every CEO, this is going to be different. As for one, it might be sales and business development, whereas for another, it could be marketing or product development. So knowing yourself, what are your superpowers and what do you excel at? Figuring this out is essential, as this is going to be a key indicator of where you need to be prioritizing your time. I'll give you an example. One CEO I worked with was exceptional at business development. Yet when we broke down his time to look at what he was doing, it became clear that most of his week was being spent solving internal problems, sitting in meetings, and handling admin. Yes, all of those tasks were important, but he had an amazing team around him that he simply wasn't utilizing. Once we identified his zone of genius and created a plan to remove nearly everything else from his plate, the company increased its turnover by 130% over the next 12 months. Not because he worked harder, but because he finally stopped spending his best hours on the wrong work. Question number two is, where does your time have the greatest impact? This is different from question one because the answer changes depending on the stage the business is at and what matters most right now. So think about where in the business, if you spend more of your days, would it massively impact your growth, revenue, or stability? With clients, I've seen this range from devising the strategy to setting the vision to spending time with their team to coach them and give them the support they need. It could also include marketing, liaising with investors, fundraising, or building relationships with potential clients. Where your time has the greatest impact may overlap with your zone of genius, but that isn't always the case. That's why it helps to think about this separately to ensure you're not overlooking anything. Question number three is, what can only be done by you? Every CEO has responsibilities that genuinely belong to them. Setting the direction, making major strategic decisions, coaching key members of the leadership team, managing important stakeholder relationships, and creating alignment across the business. These things require your judgment and authority, and they can't simply be handed to someone else. So look across your recurring responsibilities, vision, and strategy, and identify what can genuinely only be done by you. The reason these three questions are so effective is your role is the intersection of where you're exceptional, where the business needs you most, and what only you can do. That's where your attention belongs. And by answering them, you can essentially create a job specification of what your role needs to look like at the current stage of the business. And that'll be your answer for what you should be doing as CEO. Everything else outside of that needs to earn its place. Because every hour you spend on work that someone else could be doing is an hour you're not spending on the work that can only be done by you. And that always comes at the expense of the business. Whenever I have application calls for my Evolve CEO program, one question that I always ask is, if you look back on an average day or week, how much of your time was spent on work that only you can do? And how much was spent putting out fires, reacting to problems, or being involved in things that you shouldn't? It's really common for CEOs to realize that 60, 70, or even 80% of their week is spent reacting or solving problems and doing work that doesn't belong to them anymore. And that's a huge issue, as time wasted in the wrong areas doesn't just impact your revenue and bottom line, it also directly impacts your ability to prioritize your relationships, health, and the other areas of your life. That's why you can use the clarity that you gain from these three questions as the lens for everything you take on, as every meeting, request, problem, and opportunity that lands with you can now be measured against one question. Does this belong in the role that I've just defined? With that in mind, once you've defined your role, the next step is to audit where your time has actually been going. Look back over the last 2 to 3 weeks and review your calendar, to-do list, emails, and major commitments. And for each one, ask, was this a good use of my time? Did it meaningfully move the business forward, support a key priority, or require my involvement? Then ask, did this genuinely need to be done by me? Not whether you could do it faster or better, whether it actually required the CEO. Anything that failed those tests should either be removed, delegated, or placed on what I call a not to do list. I regularly find that when I do this process with my private clients, that it frees up 5 to 15 hours a week, simply because they stop spending their best time on work that no longer belongs to their role. But there's a deeper layer to this, as knowing what you should be doing and actually doing it can be completely different problems. Because most CEOs I speak to know that they should be more strategic, delegating more, and not jumping into every problem. Yet they still do. And if you're honest with yourself, you probably do too. The reason is rarely a lack of discipline or awareness, and more often, it's identity. Because for years, your value, momentum, and success came from your ability to hustle, grind, and get things done. That's why your self-worth becomes tied to being the fixer. But CEO work looks different. Strategy, thinking, leading, developing people, it really gives you the same immediate feeling of productivity. That's why so many CEOs feel guilty for doing this type of work, or like they should be focusing on something else. I see this all the time where, despite knowing where the business now needs them, CEOs self-sabotage and throw themselves back into the weeds because that's where they feel safe. The reason this happens is that even though the business has evolved, your identity hasn't evolved with it. So while the traits of being able to do, solve, and carry everything worked at the start to drive growth, at scale, those same behaviors now bottleneck it. The worst part is, because they're so used to operating that way, it feels like they're doing the right job, even though it's not the job the business needs from them now. This video has shown you what your role should look like, but what it can't show you is where you're still being pulled back into the old one, why it keeps pulling you back in, and what that pattern is currently costing you. Because when you're inside the business every day, it's incredibly difficult to see your own blind spots. Because you may know that you're too reactive, over-involved, or spending too much time in the weeds. But unless you understand why that keeps happening, you'll keep rebuilding your calendar, delegating a few tasks, and then slowly finding yourself right back in the middle of everything. That's exactly why I created the CEO Evolution Assessment. It's a free 7-minute diagnostic designed to help you see whether the way you're currently thinking, leading, and operating has evolved at the same pace as the business. It'll help you uncover where the company is too dependent on you, what patterns are pulling you back into the day-to-day, and what needs to shift first. And if you're running a scaling company, I personally review every submission and I send back a personalized breakdown of what I can see, where I believe the biggest constraint is, and what I'd focus on first. The link to take the assessment is below. So I'd love to hear from you. What were your biggest realizations from this video about where you should be spending your time? Share your thoughts and questions in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and hit the subscribe button, as every week I put out new videos on how to become a more effective CEO. I've been Byron Morrison. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.